Every crew refused the assignment. One captain signed for it anyway, in an airframe built from scrap. 20 minutes straight and level over Bougainville. No room to maneuver, no escort, because without those photographs, the landing couldn't happen. This is the crew nobody wanted on the mission nobody would take, and what they brought back changed the campaign. Months earlier, at Port Moresby in New Guinea, a weathered B-17E with the serial 41-2666 sat stripped and unwanted on a hard stand, scabbed with oil. Captain Jay Zeamer, Jr., already known for flying at odd hours and ignoring polite advice, decided it was not junk, but a starting point. He and a handful of airmen gathered parts from wrecks, traded favors, and worked in the heat until the engines would light and the hydraulics would hold pressure. The aircraft took a name, Old 666, and he recruited the men others turned aside, including Technical Sergeant Joseph Sarnoski in the nose, who could handle a bomb sight, a camera switch, and a .50 with equal economy. By spring 1943, when 5th Air Force needed someone to photograph Bougainville and Buka for the coming push into the Northern Solomons, the regular crews passed. The job meant holding straight and level in daylight over defended airfields. Old 666 launched on June 16, 1943 anyway, with the navigator already running the dead reckoning plot as the wheels left Jackson Airfield and the flight engineer checking fuel flow for the third time. The airplane they took skyward was standard only on paper. The factory nose of a B-17E carried no turret, so the crew added flexible .5s in the nose, doubled up on waist guns, strengthened the tail position, and wired a fixed .50 on the cockpit floor so the pilot could fire straight ahead without calling a shot. They scrounged ammunition cans, linked belts until the metal teeth felt endless, and tucked armor plate where they could, not from a catalog but from sheet stock bent on the ramp. Cameras were set to capture overlapping frames that surveyors could stitch into a map. To do that, the aircraft had to hold a constant heading, altitude, and speed, so the intervalometer, the timer pacing each exposure, would space the frames at equal distances along the ground. The navigator called drift and ground speed. The pilot trimmed against crosswind until the slip skid ball settled, and the bombardier worked the camera switch while keeping his forward gun within reach. The flight engineer kept turbos spooled, watched manifold pressure and cylinder head temperatures, and tapped a knuckle against the panel when a needle edged where it shouldn't. They couldn't turn away once the run started, so they built a plan to survive it. They would cross Buka to draw the scramble, roll wings level on the first line over Bougainville's coast, and let the camera run while the guns covered every approach angle. If a 0 came straight in, the fixed .50 from the cockpit and the nose guns would answer. Beam attacks would meet the waist guns. Any overshoot into the high 6 would slide into the tail's field. Each man counted rounds in his head, spread spare belts where hands could find them without looking, and pulled oxygen masks into place as the bombardment group patch on a jacket sleeve gathered a thin layer of frost. We're about to start that straight and level run with fighters climbing from Buka. If you want more cockpit truth like this, subscribe before the first pass comes head on. The morning sky is clean as Old 666 coasts over water toward the dark line of Bougainville. The intervalometer ticks once, then again, and the first frames begin as the airplane steadies into its course. On Buka, fighters move along a strip, wheels already coming up by the time the camera logs a third exposure and contrails trace faint lines beyond the coast. They come in fast from the 12. The captain lowers his chin, sights through plexiglass, and thumbs the trigger on the fixed .50, the gun chewing a hard line forward. The lead 0 keeps coming until a flash leaps from its cowl. Then it folds and falls Empty brass rattles on the cockpit floor, and the nose plexiglass hums. Another pair tries a shallow slashing approach from the high port beam, looking for the camera ship's blind side. The waist gunners have rehearsed this, and the first burst walks across aluminum and into the green belly of the nearer fighter until it skids wide and dives for the deck. The second snaps a roll that carries it short of the fuselage and off into a climbing turn as tracers march along its right wing. For a heartbeat, the interphone is only wind hiss. Head on again, then a snap from above that comes too fast to count. The top turret coughs as it comes around. The beam guns answer, and the B-17 doesn't flinch because it cannot. The camera needs straight lines. A Zero clips the wing with a shallow dive, makes a firing pass, and streaks through, holes already opening across the skin and into the nose. The tail shakes, but the gyro stays level. In the nose, an explosion throws steel and glass into the forward compartment. Sarnoski drops, then drags himself back up by the edges of the frame, gets a hand around the charging handle, clears a jam, and squeezes until a fighter filling the glass flashes, pitches over, and falls trailing smoke toward the sea. Cordite hangs sweet and bitter in the nose. The pilot takes a hit through a knee, and later a wrist, and keeps his hands on the yoke because the airplane will not fly itself. The navigator counts seconds and miles to the end of the run, while the intervalometer keeps the camera clicking. A Zero flashes across the bow low, trying to chew the nose open, but the fixed gun is already barking through its arc, and the fighter shears left with pieces coming off the canopy. The altimeter holds its slow drift, and the throttle quadrants hum. A tail end Charlie noses in with a textbook pursuit curve, and the tail gunner meets it with a stitched answer that starts behind and winds forward until the cowl coughs smoke. That pilot brakes hard and disappears under the cheer. Stabilizer, and the big ship rides through the turbulence his wake leaves behind. For a second, the interphone clicks twice, and then goes dead quiet. The photo line reaches its midpoint, and the navigator calls a course tweak. The pilot adds a finger of rudder trim without changing bank. The camera is still running, and the bombardier shoves a fresh magazine into position, then sets his feet again on the deck. Another Zero comes head on, but the top turret joins the nose guns and forces the pass wide. The oxygen hiss in the masks is steady and cold. The end of the line arrives. The navigator calls it, and the bombardier flips the camera switch off, the intervalometer falling silent. There's no ceremony. They roll 5 degrees for the next strip and hold trim, because they need a second line to make the map complete. The intervalometer ticks go quiet, and the ship seems briefly lighter. A diving attack from high starboard rakes the wing. Tracer lines arc back up and clip the attacker's vertical tail hard enough to make it wag as it climbs away. The pilot's wrist is slick now, but his hand stays on the throttles while the engineer watches manifold pressure and cylinder head temperatures without looking up. The trim wheel stops buzzing, and the cockpit settles into a low vibration. On the second line, the fighters try a rolling pincer, one from each beam to make the waist guns choose. The left gunner holds his fire a beat and then drags it through the arc, catching the near one as it overshoots. The right gunner looses a short burst to send the far one high and out of plane. The B-17 stays on course, and the camera finishes the run. The vibration remains constant, a low hum running up through the yokes. Cameras off and fuel checked. They turn south toward the long reach to New Guinea, and the chase continues over open water. The captain sheds weight from the bay and buys a handful of knots with a shallow descent. And a Zero takes a last long-range swipe that finds nothing but aluminum before turning back to its island. The only sound for a moment is engine drone and a faint whistle through new holes. They fly the rest bleeding and counting minutes to landfall, eyes moving from oil pressure to airspeed to horizon. The engineer locks a fuel selector, the radio operator sends a terse position call, and the navigator announces land ahead with the calm of a man who expected it. At Port Moresby, medics pulled the crew from the aircraft while ground men peered into a nose that looked like a workshop after an explosion. The film went straight to processing and came back sharp enough for tracing. Records vary on the exact number of enemy fighters destroyed, but every required frame had been taken. In the weeks that followed, analysts laid the prints on tables and drew lines across Bougainville's coast. Those lines became briefings for the Marines who went ashore at Empress Augusta Bay on November 1st, 1943. The intelligence value of a single flight exceeded what any planner had counted on. Technical Sergeant Joseph R. Sarnoski died of his wounds. Captain Jay Zeamer, Jr. recovered after a long stretch in a hospital bed. Both were awarded the Medal of Honor for the same mission, and reconnaissance tasking in the 5th Air Force gained priority for escorts when range allowed. The plane was a wreck until someone decided it was a tool, and then it became one that could change a campaign. Improvisation works when the goal is clear and the crew holds the line long enough for everyone else to move. For more sober, ground truth combat stories from World War II, subscribe.